Excuse me, Miss Welfare Services are 3 blocks down. The marble lobby stilled as Rick Halverson blocked her path, not realizing who he had just humiliated. The sting of words meant to diminish was nothing new to Dr. Celeste Langston. In boardrooms lined with polished oak, she had learned to smile when underestimated. In conference calls dominated by deep voices and shallow minds, she had learned to listen before speaking. But something about this moment, a Southern bank lobby draped in false civility, a man in a polyester tie, assuming she did not belong, settled into her ribs like ice. She looked at the nameplate on his lapel. Rick Halverson, branch manager. She had never met him. Clearly, he had never met her either. Celeste said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she let silence do what it does best, uncover the tone behind the words. The lobby was quiet except for the soft tap of heels and the shuffling of paperwork. A few heads turned, eyes widened slightly. Someone stifled a breath. And somewhere near the rope line, a teenager reached into her handbag and opened the Instagram app. Celeste's expression didn't shift. She kept her back straight, her briefcase at her side, her posture loose but rooted. Her navy pantsuit caught the overhead lights just enough to remind anyone observant that this was custom fabric, not off the rack. The gold-plated initials on her briefcase were subtle, but not hidden. C.A.L. Celeste Asha Langston, the monogram of a woman who knew where she was going and how much it cost to get there. "I'm here about my account portfolio," she said, her voice low, measured. Rick squinted as if she'd spoken in a language foreign to his ears. Then he laughed, loudly, unapologetically. His voice echoed off the marble walls with the kind of disbelief reserved for bad jokes and unpaid overdrafts. "Your account portfolio?" he repeated, glancing around as if inviting the other customers to share in the absurdity. "Ma'am, this is Heritage National Bank, not a payday loan center." Behind her, the queue slowed. 2 men in khaki suits exchanged glances. An older woman with a white bun and pink acrylics stepped closer, frowning. Still, Celeste did not move. The briefcase at her side remained closed, though her fingers curled tighter around the handle. Her eyes scanned the room not for an exit, but for the measure of silence. Who was watching? Who would remember? "I understand there may be confusion," she said. "Could I speak with someone about my banking relationship here?" Rick smirked. It was the kind of smirk worn by men who had never been told no by anyone they respected, and certainly not by anyone they deemed beneath them. He crossed his arms, his sleeves tugging back just enough to reveal a cheap digital watch. "Do you have proper identification?" he asked, raising his voice just slightly. "Do you even have an account here?" It was not a question. It was an accusation, one she had heard in department stores, in airport lounges, at security desks. A question formed not by curiosity but presumption. Behind the teller desk, Rosa Delgado stiffened. She'd worked at Heritage National for 8 years and knew Rick's tone too well. She'd seen him frown at dreadlocks, seen him squint at Spanish surnames. But this was different. This wasn't just suspicion. This was open performance. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a stack of deposit slips. Her jaw clenched. She said nothing. From the far end of the lobby, Maggie Ellison watched with furrowed brows. Maggie had been banking here for over 3 decades. A retired schoolteacher, she came in every Thursday to cash her pension check and chat with whoever was working the front. She didn't own a smartphone, not really. She had one of those budget flip phones with buttons the size of thumbnails and a screen barely large enough to show a weather app. But she saw the shift in the room, the stillness, the disrespect. Rick turned toward the general line. "Ma'am, if you need to cash a check, The regular customer queue is right there, or I'm sure the community credit union down the street would be happy to assist you. Celeste glanced at her phone. It read 2:50 p.m. She had 10 minutes before the board convened upstairs. This should have taken 2. She let out the faintest breath and reached into her briefcase. The leather creaked slightly. She withdrew a sleek business card, thick cardstock, embossed print, and a silver foil logo. She offered it. Rick didn't look. He waved it off like an infomercial pamphlet. "I don't have time for games, Patricia," he said, motioning toward his assistant manager behind the glass wall. "Can you help this lady understand that VIP services require actual account verification?" Vanessa Crowley approached slowly. She had overheard everything. Her face was flushed, a contrast to her beige blazer. Her heels clicked with hesitation. "Derek," she began. "It's Rick," he snapped without turning. "Let's not get sidetracked." "I think maybe we should—" "She claims to have accounts here," Rick continued, gesturing toward Celeste with an exaggerated sweep. "But look at her. Does she look like one of our platinum clients?" The words rang out like a verdict. The unspoken, "You don't belong. You never did." Behind the counter, Rosa stopped typing. Maggie's hand reached for her purse. She pulled out her phone and fumbled with the camera. Her hands weren't what they used to be, but she'd recorded her granddaughter's ballet recital last spring. She could record this. Celeste said nothing. A soft vibration buzzed against her palm. A message from Travis Reed, her executive assistant. "Boardroom ready for 3. All directors on site, waiting for green light." Another customer, young, early 20s, hoodie and earbuds, began live streaming under her breath. "Y'all need to see this. This man's straight up racist. This is happening right now in Savannah." Rick turned back to Celeste, visibly annoyed. "Look, ma'am, if you can't provide identification, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a secure financial institution. We can't have disruptions." He turned toward the security desk. "Harold?" Harold Jennings stood. The former police officer moved slowly, uncertainly. He looked at the woman in front of him, poised, silent, unmoving, and felt something in his gut shift. "Ma'am, he began. "Officer Jennings," Celeste interrupted softly, her eyes still on Rick. "Could you give me just 2 more minutes?" Harold blinked. His nameplate was tiny, hard to read from where she stood, but she had used his name. Rick scoffed. "This is not a negotiation." Celeste's fingers brushed her phone screen. Another message from Travis. "Director's getting impatient. Text me when you're upstairs. We'll delay 5 mins max." Rick, seeing the movement, leaned in smugly. "Calling someone to vouch for you won't help. The police will be here in minutes." Celeste didn't flinch. Maggie stepped forward now, phone in hand. "Young man, that woman has been nothing but polite." Rick spun around. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you not to interfere." "Disrespect concerns everyone," Maggie replied, her voice firm. From behind the glass, Rosa texted a single line to her district contact. "Emergency at downtown branch. You need to see this." In the silence that followed, the elevator dinged. A soft sound, barely audible, but it would change everything. Celeste checked her phone again. 2:54 p.m. Then she murmured, mostly to herself, 10 minutes. Maggie leaned into a stranger, whispering, "Who is she?" "I don't have time for games, Patricia," Rick snapped. He hadn't realized he was playing one he couldn't win. Vanessa Crowley stiffened at the sound of her name, unsure whether to obey or retreat. She had heard that tone before, grating with entitlement, sharp with arrogance, but never so publicly, never with this much venom. Her eyes flicked toward Dr. Celeste Langston, still standing in the center of the lobby, as calm and unmoved as polished granite. Vanessa didn't know exactly who this woman was, but she knew how dangerous Rick's assumptions had just become. Somewhere near the main door, Maggie Ellison leaned forward, balancing her flip phone with both hands as she recorded. Her brow was furrowed, her jaw clenched with that same righteous fury she'd felt as a young teacher in Montgomery during the late 1960s. She'd once told her students that dignity was something you carried in your back even when others tried to beat it out of you. Watching Celeste now, she saw that same steel. Earlier that week, Travis Reed had half-joked during a phone call with Celeste. Some people only understand truth when it walks in wearing heels. Celeste had smiled at that. He hadn't known just how prophetic he'd been. The mood in the lobby had shifted from awkwardness to anxiety. The air felt denser now, like a storm front pressing down on the building. The whispers had stopped, the shuffling ceased. All eyes were on Rick Halverson, and he was too arrogant to realize the moment was no longer his. The goal of this chapter was taking shape: to escalate Rick's discriminatory behavior beyond repair and to show the ripples of his condescension widening. Even as the tension increased, the silence of the staff and bystanders was breaking. What began as quiet discomfort was now turning into action. Outside, a cold wind rustled fallen leaves along the curb, carrying the scent of rain and gasoline. It was early fall in Savannah, Georgia, and the historic city was unusually overcast. The marble of the bank's interior, normally a symbol of stability and prestige, now felt like a stage for collapse. Celeste remained exactly where she stood, near the roped-off VIP counter, unmoved by the increasing absurdity of the situation. Her phone buzzed once more in her hand. "Boardroom ready, 5 minutes to delay max. All directors present." Travis had sent another message. She replied with 2 words: "Slight delay." Rick crossed his arms tighter, as if the posture could make up for the authority he was slowly losing. He gestured toward Celeste as though presenting evidence. "She's causing a disruption," he said, his voice rising. "Intimidating customers, refusing to leave, demanding access to private account areas. I've been more than patient." He turned toward security. "Harold, please escort this woman out." Harold Jennings, a former officer who had seen his share of nonsense in 3 decades of law enforcement, paused. His eyes studied Celeste again. Not because she was a threat, but because she wasn't. There was something in the way she moved, the way she remained grounded, unapologetic, and still, that reminded him of the judges he used to stand guard beside in federal courthouses. Before he could act, Celeste addressed him directly. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Officer Jennings," she said, "would you please ask dispatch if attempting to conduct account business qualifies as trespassing?" Harold blinked. Her tone was polite, respectful, but laced with an edge that made him pause. She had used his name again clearly, intentionally. The question wasn't about her conduct. It was about Rick's. "Ma'am?" he asked, just above a whisper, caught between orders and instincts. She nodded slowly, as if to say, "You know what this is." Rick didn't even notice the shift. He was too busy glaring at his phone, preparing his call to the police. He dialed quickly and pressed the phone to his ear. "Yes. Hello. This is Rick Halverson, branch manager at the Heritage National Bank downtown. I need someone removed from the premises immediately." Several customers gasped. Rosa Delgado looked up sharply from behind the teller desk, her face pale. She hadn't said a word yet. But she was watching, and she was remembering. Every quiet moment of bias, every eyebrow Rick had raised at customers with names he couldn't pronounce, every time he'd referred to "those people" in meetings where no one dared to challenge him. Rick's voice rose as he continued his call. "Yes, she's disrupting operations and intimidating my staff. She refuses to identify herself. I feel threatened." Celeste's face remained unchanged. To the dispatcher, The call likely sounded serious. But in the lobby, the truth was visible. This was no disruption. This was humiliation masquerading as protocol. The young woman near the front door was still live streaming. "This guy's calling the cops on a lady just for standing in a bank lobby. Y'all, this is crazy. She hasn't raised her voice once." The viewer count ticked past 400. "Ma'am," Rick said, lowering the phone slightly, "you need to understand the seriousness of this situation. Trespassing is a criminal offense." Maggie's voice rang out before Celeste could respond. "Young man, that woman has been nothing but polite," she said, stepping forward now. Her voice, though aged, still carried the authority of 7 decades. "You're the one being aggressive." Rick turned, red creeping into his face. "Ma'am, please don't interfere with bank security procedures." "Disrespect is a security issue," Maggie shot back, not backing down. Behind the counter, Rosa fumbled for her phone. She began to type rapidly. "Emergency at downtown branch. Halverson is calling 911 on a black woman customer. Something's really wrong." The message went straight to her district compliance officer. Celeste glanced at her watch again. 2:52 p.m. 2 minutes before the board meeting was supposed to start, the elevator behind the teller line dinged again, and Harold finally stepped closer to Rick. "Maybe we should wait just a minute," he said, cautious but firm. Rick shook his head. "This is not up for debate. This woman is trespassing. End of discussion." On the second floor, behind polished glass doors and inside a walnut-paneled room, 12 board members were seated, murmuring among themselves. Travis stood near the head of the table, phone in hand, watching the live stream as it reached 698 viewers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The footage said everything. Back downstairs, the energy in the lobby had changed. Even the marble walls seemed to echo with a different sound, now less echo, more tension. Rick was still on the phone when the elevator doors opened behind him. Out stepped Nathan Corbett, regional manager. He was tall, silver-haired, and tan in a too-tight suit. His eyes swept the room with immediate confusion as he registered the crowd, the silent tension, the camera phones raised and recording. "Rick?" he called out, trying to keep his voice even. Rick didn't turn around. "I'm handling a security situation," he muttered, still clutching his phone. Nathan took 2 steps forward. "Rick," he said more firmly, "hang up that phone." Rick looked up, surprised by the interruption. "Tom, give me 2 minutes." "I said, hang up the phone," Nathan repeated, his voice cut through the room like a blade. The phone crackled with static. "Sir, are you still there?" the dispatcher's voice asked. "Officers are 5 minutes out." Celeste finally spoke again, the first time in minutes. "Mr. Corbett," she said softly, "it's all right. Let him finish his call." Nathan froze. She knew his name. She hadn't introduced herself. No one had. He looked at her again, her posture, her tone, the custom tailoring of her jacket, the shine of the monogrammed briefcase, the stillness in her eyes. He'd seen that kind of calm before, but never standing in his lobby. "Rick," Nathan said slowly, his voice cracking now, "tell them it's a false alarm." Rick looked confused. "What?" Nathan stepped closer, panic rising. "Tell the dispatcher you made a mistake. Now." "It's not a mistake," Rick said, looking between Celeste and Nathan. "This woman's not a client. She won't even give her name. She's Rick." Nathan's voice broke. "Tell them it's a false alarm." The entire lobby went still, a marble tomb of exposed failure. Rick stared, finally raising the phone. Dispatch," he stammered. "This might be a misunderstanding." "Sir, are you canceling the unit?" the dispatcher asked. Rick glanced at Celeste, then at Nathan. "Yes," he said. "Cancel the call." Across the lobby, The live stream viewer count hit 1,216. Celeste checked her watch again. 2:54 p.m. She stepped forward, reached into her briefcase, and pulled out a card. The same card Rick had refused to look at 10 minutes earlier. She held it out to Nathan. "Perhaps this will clarify things," she said quietly. Nathan took it with trembling fingers. And as his eyes scanned the text, Dr. Celeste Asha Langston, Chief Executive Officer, Langston Equity Group, Board Chair and Majority Shareholder, Heritage National Bank. His face went pale. Rick noticed. "What?" he asked, stepping closer. "Some business card isn't going to—" He stopped. His eyes scanned the card, then dropped to the floor. His mouth opened, then closed. Maggie stepped closer to her camera and whispered, "She owns the bank." And the air in the room stopped moving. The live stream count ticked past 1,300. Rick was no longer in control. He was in free fall. And Celeste stood in the center, unmoved, unshaken, waiting, because the real conversation was only just beginning. "I resign," he said. Celeste turned to Nathan. "Now let's talk about your oversight failure. Nathan Corbett, I need you to explain how a manager with 2 discrimination complaints kept his job for 15 years. The words rang out like a verdict before a stunned courtroom. For a moment, all Nathan could hear was the echo of his own breath, shallow and sharp, ricocheting off the marble. The air in the bank lobby was thick, not just with tension, but with reckoning. It settled on his shoulders like a wet coat. Rosa Delgado looked up from behind the teller counter, her fingers still on her keyboard, though the screen in front of her had long since stopped meaning anything. She knew this moment was about more than Rick's downfall. It was about everything that came after, and it was about whether people like her, quiet, observant, unsure if their voices mattered, would be allowed to step forward or forever remain shadows in systems that protected the loudest. A few days earlier, Rosa had overheard Nathan at a staff training say, "We measure performance by numbers, not feelings." She had scribbled that line on a post-it and tucked it into her notebook. Now, standing in a lobby frozen by shame, she realized those words weren't a policy, they were an excuse, and they were unraveling in front of everyone. The bank's lobby, normally sterile and hushed like a museum of old money, had become something else entirely. The artificial calm of ceiling-mounted speakers playing piano versions of Earth, Wind, and Fire was now bizarrely out of place. Outside, traffic moved along Broughton Street in Savannah like nothing had happened. Inside, the world had tipped on its axis. Celeste Langston stood composed, a full breath taller than everyone in the room, though her heels barely added an inch. Her voice remained measured, free of emotion, free of threat, as if she were in a boardroom instead of the battlefield Rick Halverson had turned this branch into. The goal of the moment was clear now: to pull back the curtain. Rick hadn't acted alone. He'd thrived in a system that had covered for him, ignored complaints, and dismissed warning signs because his performance numbers were solid and his smile was convincing to those who looked like him. Nathan tried to find a version of himself that wasn't complicit. "Dr. Langston," he said, throat dry. I didn't know." Celeste arched one brow, just slightly. "You didn't know what, Mr. Corbett? That your branch manager had received 2 formal discrimination complaints? Or that he handled minority customers differently, more aggressively, more dismissively than his white clientele?" "I wasn't made aware of that level of detail." "Because you didn't ask," she interrupted softly. "Because the complaints didn't affect profit margins." A stillness swept over the room. Rosa stepped from behind the counter. Her voice shook, but she stood straight. "There's more than 2, she said. "I documented everything, for almost a year. I have records, customer names, dates, how they were treated, what was said. I even submitted 2 anonymous reports to HR. Nothing happened. Nathan turned toward her, shocked. Why didn't you bring this directly to me? Rosa swallowed. Because I didn't trust that you'd listen, and I was right. Vanessa Crowley stood nearby, arms folded across her stomach. Her face was pale. It's true, she said, almost whispering. I didn't know what to do either. I saw things. Rick questioned black customers more. He always asked them to show extra ID, questioned their accounts, even regulars. But I thought, if HR wasn't acting, maybe it wasn't my place to say anything. Maggie Ellison stood silently near the entrance, her phone still recording. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were bright with the kind of fire that doesn't age. Her voice came out stronger than anyone expected. I may be old, she said, but I know a cover-up when I see one. Celeste didn't flinch. Travis, she said, her voice directed into her phone on speaker. Pull up Federal Fair Lending compliance reports for this branch. Also flag any unresolved customer complaints tagged for customer experience review. There was a pause. Then Travis's voice came through, steady and clinical. I'm seeing 17 potential violations, 12 documented complaints that were never properly escalated, 6 patterns of disparate impact based on race in service delivery. Rosa's hand clenched at her side. She had suspected as much. But hearing it aloud validated, official made her stomach twist. Nathan's face was ashen. Celeste turned to him. You received staff reports documenting discrimination and chose not to act because the numbers looked clean, but you were measuring the wrong thing. I didn't mean... You didn't listen, she said, this time with steel. That was your job. Customers in the lobby began murmuring. The live stream chat had grown wild, now well over 1,400 viewers. Screenshots were being posted, copied, sent to newsrooms. A popular Savannah Twitter account posted, Bank CEO exposes racial discrimination at her own branch, Live. Vanessa was shaking now, though not with fear, more like awakening. I don't want to be silent anymore, she said. This culture, it's been wrong for a long time. Celeste nodded once, like a conductor acknowledging a soloist who'd joined the orchestra late but perfectly in tune. Then help us fix it, she said. Where do we start? With honesty, Celeste replied. She turned back toward Nathan. You're terminated, effective immediately. The words landed like a closing gavel. Nathan's knees wobbled. Dr. Langston, I have a family, a mortgage. This wasn't my fault alone. Celeste tilted her head. This became your problem the moment you chose silence over investigation. You allowed Rick to act unchecked. You enabled bias to live in plain sight. Harold Jennings, who had watched all of this unfold with arms folded and jaw clenched, stepped forward. Do you want me to escort him? Celeste shook her head. Let him walk. He should feel the weight of it. Nathan turned, still dazed, and walked past the rows of customers, cameras, and colleagues who would never see him the same way again. He stepped into the elevator that had once delivered him to comfortable distance, and now lowered him into obscurity. When the doors closed, Celeste turned to Rosa. Effective immediately, you're the interim branch manager. Rosa's breath caught. I what? You've demonstrated integrity under pressure, and courage. That's leadership. Vanessa touched Rosa's arm. You'll be amazing. I don't know if I'm ready on... You are, Celeste said. This place needs someone who sees what others look past. Rosa felt tears press behind her eyes, but held them back. Not here. Not yet. Celeste turned to the room, raising her voice just enough for every customer to hear. This branch will undergo full reform, bias recognition training, complaint system overhaul. Every customer, regardless of appearance, will be treated with dignity, and we will be transparent every step of the way. Maggie smiled. phone still in hand. "About damn time," she said. Outside, the media had arrived. Cameras were setting up near the doors, mics clipped to lapels, tripods being planted like flags. Inside, something much older than a press cycle was ending, and something harder, something lasting was just beginning. Celeste turned back to Rosa, voice soft. "Get ready, we start reforming this place now. The next time someone like me walks in here, they won't be asked for extra ID. They'll be asked if they want coffee." The words echoed across the marble lobby, not like a declaration, but a promise. Rosa Delgado stood behind the customer service desk, her voice steady, her newly laminated interim branch manager badge catching the fluorescent light. Just an hour earlier, she had stood silent, cautious, tucked into the margins of compliance and fear. Now she stood at the helm of change, with Celeste Langston's eyes on her, not judging, but trusting. Only 2 days earlier, Celeste had finished writing a draft for her board address, where she'd planned to speak on the Dignity First Protocol, a concept she envisioned would redefine customer interaction across all Heritage National Bank branches. In it, she had typed the line, "Dignity isn't policy, it's the foundation of service." She hadn't shared it yet, hadn't needed to, but Rosa had just spoken the spirit of it aloud, in her own voice. The goal of this chapter had come sharply into focus. Not just removing the rot, but planting something new, immediate, public, and alive with intention. Outside, the sky had turned a heavy gray, and the sidewalks along Broughton Street glistened with the sheen of passing rain. Inside, however, the air had shifted from tension to momentum. News crews were arriving, their camera lenses pressed against the lobby glass. Every eye inside turned toward Rosa, Vanessa, and Celeste, as if expecting some proclamation. Celeste took one step forward, her heels tapped with purpose. "This is where transformation begins," she said. "Not at headquarters, not on a training webinar. Right here, in front of the people who were ignored for too long." Behind the teller counter, Vanessa Crowley opened her laptop and pulled up the policy files. "Where do we start?" she asked. Celeste turned to her tablet and began tapping. "The Dignity First Protocol goes live now. Harold?" The security guard stood straighter. "Yes, ma'am?" "You'll begin the security retraining program. Bias recognition. De-escalation not just with force, but with awareness. You'll help draft the handbook for every other branch." Harold nodded slowly. "I'd be honored." "Rosa," Celeste said, turning to the new branch manager. "Schedule 40 hours of mandatory training. Every single staff member, no exceptions. Unconscious bias, cultural competency, federal fair lending law." "Already starting a list," Rosa replied. "We'll rotate shifts so no service is interrupted." "Well, Vanessa," Celeste added, "audit every policy Rick put in place. Flag any procedure that imposed different rules on different customers." Vanessa swallowed and nodded. "There are several." A murmur passed through the gathered customers. A man in a Braves cap turned to his wife and whispered, "Did she just say 40 hours of training? That's more than our manager gave us all year." From behind the counter, a younger teller raised her hand timidly. "Do we get to give feedback on what policies we thought were unfair?" Celeste turned to her and smiled. "Not only do you get to, you're required to. Staff insight is the backbone of reform." The tension that had hung over the staff all afternoon began to loosen, not disappear, but shift. There was still uncertainty, still fear. But now, there was agency. Celeste turned her tablet toward the group, swiping through diagrams and bullet points. "Here's what else is changing today. We're installing real-time customer feedback devices at every teller station. Touchscreen, 1 to 5 star rating. Every rating sent directly to corporate and flagged if it dips below a threshold. Maggie Ellison, still seated near the front of the line, raised an eyebrow. What if some folks are just angry at the world and want to lash out? Pattern recognition, Celeste answered without hesitation. If it's one comment, it's a bad day. If it's 100, it's a systemic problem. The live stream continued, now crossing over 4,000 viewers. In the comments, people were beginning to shift from outrage to curiosity. Wait, she's actually fixing it in real time? This is better than a PR statement. That bank manager just got replaced by a real one. Rosa tapped her keyboard quickly. Training schedule begins tomorrow. 40 hours across 2 weeks, rotating shifts to cover service windows. Vanessa added, I'm flagging the ID verification policy. Rick made it stricter than what corporate requires. Remove it, Celeste said flatly. Equal policy for all customers. If we need to verify identity, it applies to everyone. No exceptions. Just then, a customer who had been quietly waiting in line stepped forward. She was an older black woman in a floral church hat, gloves in her left hand, checkbook in the right. Excuse me, ma'am, she said, looking to Celeste. Do you mind if I say something? Celeste smiled. Of course. I came in here expecting the same treatment I got 2 months ago, extra questions. Side eyes, asking me to step aside while they verified something that never needed verifying. She glanced at Rosa, then Vanessa. But I saw what you just did here, what you're doing, and for the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm being invited, not interrogated. Applause broke out quiet at first, then stronger. Celeste nodded. We're not just opening doors today. We're fixing the floor so no one else falls through. At that moment, a man in a dark blue suit approached the glass doors. He was a television anchor from WSAV, Savannah's local NBC affiliate. A reporter followed behind, mic already clipped, camera crew in tow. Dr. Langston, he called, not waiting to be let in. We're preparing a segment on this afternoon's incident. Any statement? Celeste stepped forward slowly. We'll hold a full press conference later today. For now, you're welcome to film the reforms as they happen. He blinked. So, no closed-door meetings? This branch became national news because of closed doors, she said. We'll fix it in the open. The camera lights turned on. Rosa glanced nervously at Vanessa, who gave her a reassuring nod. Celeste took a deep breath and addressed the room again. Despite today's setbacks, I'm authorizing the full $3 million in community investment that was originally earmarked for this branch, and I'm adding $700,000 more, specifically to rebuild trust. Gasps swept through the room. That's not a reward, Celeste clarified. It's a responsibility. You lost trust. Now you earn it back. The room was silent for a moment. Then a voice near the back spoke. How do we do that? Celeste turned. By ensuring no one leaves this building today feeling invisible. A news alert dinged on Vanessa's phone. She read it silently and turned pale. What is it? Rosa asked. Vanessa showed her screen. CNN breaking CEO turns bank meltdown into national reform model. Rosa exhaled slowly. It's really happening, isn't it? Celeste checked her watch. We're just getting started. She looked to Rosa. This branch will become a model, not in spite of what happened today, but because of it. 3 months later, people still walked into the Savannah branch just to take pictures. The polished brass doors of Heritage National Bank now opened to a different kind of silence, a purposeful one. No longer filled with tension, it was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the ground is still soaked, but the air smells of something new. In the 3 months since the scandal, something extraordinary had taken root. What was once a space marked by exclusion and shame had become a living blueprint for dignity, accountability, and transformation. Back in October, Travis Reed had stood in the boardroom upstairs, unsure if the fallout could ever be contained. Celeste had told him that day. Real reform isn't what you promise in a press release. It's what you can measure. He hadn't known how prophetic her words would become. Because here, on this cool winter morning, the numbers spoke louder than any press headline ever could. A row of touchscreen monitors now greeted customers near the entrance, displaying the branch's real-time customer satisfaction score, 4.8 out of 5 stars, with daily breakdowns and feedback quotes visible to all. One comment, time-stamped from that morning, read, "First time I felt like my money and my presence mattered." The goal of this final chapter was to show the impact of sustained reform, to draw a straight line between one woman's quiet resistance and a citywide shift in how people were seen, heard, and served. The lobby looked different too, not in its bones, still marble and brass, but in its atmosphere. The old community board had been replaced by a photo wall, celebrating the 47 minority-owned businesses funded through the new investment program. Smiling faces stood beside barbershop chairs, catering trucks, daycare centers, and tech startup desks. Underneath each photo was a short story, how the funding changed their lives, how they'd once been told not today, and how today finally arrived. Rosa Delgado, now officially the full-time branch manager, walked past that wall every morning before unlocking the vaults. She wore a new navy blue suit that still felt unfamiliar on her frame. Her badge was different now, golden nameplate, black engraved letters. But what had changed most was not what was on her chest. It was the way people looked at her, as if she belonged there, as if she'd always belonged. Behind the teller line, Vanessa Crowley leaned over the compliance report folder. Since being reassigned as head of internal audits, she had become the branch's most meticulous watchdog. The shame she had once carried had turned into fuel. Every form she reviewed, every customer rating she cross-checked, was part of her penance and her purpose. The branch bustled with life. A toddler clutched her father's hand as he deposited a check. A Black Vietnam veteran offered advice to a young entrepreneur in line. The conversations were richer now, the waiting time shorter. Dignity didn't just live in the mission statement anymore. It breathed through every interaction. A small bell jingled as the brass doors swung open. In walked Celeste Langston, unannounced, her presence as quiet and composed as ever. She wore a camel-colored wool coat over a dark turtleneck, her briefcase hanging effortlessly from one hand. No media entourage, no clipboard, no security detail. Just her. Rosa spotted her immediately. "She's here," she whispered to Vanessa, who stood and straightened her blazer. Celeste offered a polite nod to the receptionist and stepped up to the front desk where Rosa was standing. "I wasn't planning to stay long," Celeste said, "but I wanted to see it for myself." Rosa beamed. "Everything's operational. Feedback systems are live. All staff completed training. We've reviewed every customer flagged under the old ID policy. Personal outreach was made. Apologies were issued." Celeste raised an eyebrow, pleased. "And the investment portfolio?" "Fully deployed. We're at 97% of our projected return to community benchmark. We used local press and faith networks to increase outreach. No radio ads, all word of mouth." Vanessa stepped beside Rosa. "And every staff member has signed off on the updated bias intervention protocol. That includes myself." Celeste smiled. "How's morale?" "Better," Rosa said. "Still healing, but better." They walked together toward the far end of the lobby, where a new feature had been installed. A customer honor wall. It displayed anonymous stories submitted by clients who had experienced discrimination in other branches or financial institutions. Their stories weren't just memorials. They were blueprints for what not to repeat. Celeste scanned the entries, one by one. I was told to bring my husband before I could apply for a business loan. They asked if I was lost when I walked into the mortgage office. They said they'd never seen someone like me with that kind of account. Rosa watched her carefully. Some of these stories, they're hard to read. They're not supposed to be easy, Celeste said. They're supposed to be real. At that moment, Maggie Ellison walked through the doors with a small group of retirees behind her. She waved. I brought some ladies from my book club, she announced. They've been asking about this place ever since the video went viral. Celeste walked over to greet her. It's good to see you, Maggie. You know what? Maggie said, tapping her phone. That live stream's been viewed over 2.3 million times. I only planned to record a few seconds. Didn't know I was about to film history. Celeste laughed gently. You helped make it. No, you did, Maggie said, gripping her hand. But I'm glad I kept the receipt. The branch buzzed with activity. A teller helped an elderly Korean man navigate a wire transfer. A high school senior applied for her first debit card. A church pastor submitted loan documents for a new community center. In the back office, Harold Jennings adjusted the television mounted on the wall. A news crew from PBS was airing a special titled Banking While Black, the Day That Changed Savannah. Footage from that October day flickered across the screen, Rick's voice, raised and trembling. Celeste, composed and silent, Rosa stepping forward with her evidence. And finally, the card. The business card that had ended it all. Harold muted the TV. That's enough of that, he said. The future's louder than the past. Out in the lobby, Celeste pulled Rosa aside one last time. There's something I want to say, she began. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like dignity being restored. Rosa looked up, startled by the quiet weight of the sentence. I'll remember that. I hope you do, Celeste replied. The doors opened again. A young woman in a thick sweater stepped inside, looking unsure. Her posture was tight, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Rosa excused herself and walked toward her. Hi, Rosa said gently. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Behind her, Celeste lingered for a moment longer. The branch she once considered closing was now more alive than ever. The scandal had faded, but the movement had just begun. Celeste delivered a quiet line to Rosa. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like dignity being restored. It began not with a speech, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows when a room full of people holds its breath, not in fear, but in reverence. Inside the auditorium of the American Banking Equity Forum in Washington, D.C., 1,000 eyes turned toward the podium where Celeste Langston stood. Cameras flashed. The lights warmed the air. Yet Celeste did not speak right away. She waited, fingers curled loosely around the wooden edges of the lectern, eyes scanning the room, not for applause, but for understanding. It had been 4 months since that October afternoon in Savannah. 4 months since the live stream, since the fallout, since a single act of racial profiling at a small Southern bank branch had ignited a national reckoning. What began as a confrontation had become a campaign, one that now carried the weight of federal attention, media coverage, and policy transformation. Celeste's journey was no longer just a personal mission. It had evolved into a public blueprint. Today's goal was simple but seismic: present the formal adoption of the Dignity First protocol across all 372 branches of Heritage National Bank and challenge other institutions to follow. Behind her, a blue screen displayed the words, "From apology to accountability, the Dignity First protocol." Celeste cleared her throat softly, and then she began. "I'm not here to ask for applause," she said. "I'm here to offer a mirror, For some of us, that reflection will be uncomfortable. For others, it will be long overdue. The room quieted even further. A few heads tilted forward, pens poised over notepads. Celeste continued. On October 24th, 2024, a black woman well-dressed, college-educated, a homeowner, a business client was treated as a threat. Not because she lacked credentials, not because she lacked integrity, but because she lacked the right look in the eyes of one employee. She paused, letting the weight settle. Her dignity was questioned, and so was mine. And in the silence that followed, a question lingered. How many times has this happened? Unseen? The camera panned over the audience, bank presidents, DEI officers, journalists, congressional aides. On screen, behind Celeste, photos rotated. The Savannah branch, the customer satisfaction kiosk, the new training manuals, Rosa Delgado shaking hands with a senator. Celeste pressed forward. We didn't fix this problem with a memo. We fixed it with action. We didn't fire one man and declare victory. We rewrote policies, reinvested in the community, put feedback tools in the hands of customers, empowered bystanders, and most importantly, made our leaders accountable, not just for results, but for respect. In the front row, Travis Reed, now promoted to Executive Vice President of Strategy, nodded slowly. The transformation Celeste had promised had been hard-won. There had been resistance, especially from legacy executives. But Celeste had held the line, refusing to dilute the initiative. Every training hour, every public acknowledgement, every redirected dollar had meant something. A few rows back sat Rosa Delgado, invited as a surprise guest. She was not dressed in the formal suit she wore behind the counter, but in a simple navy dress, her heels modest, her posture composed. She had only flown once before, and never to the capital. But today, she was part of the story. And then came the moment no one expected. Celeste stepped aside from the podium. I'd like you to meet someone. A hush swept over the room. Rosa stood, visibly nervous, but held her head high as she approached the stage. She was introduced not as a bank manager, but as the woman who stood up not with volume, but with verification. When she reached the microphone, Rosa took a breath so deep it trembled through her fingertips. I'm not a CEO, she began. I'm not an executive. I'm a daughter of immigrants. I worked my way up from teller to assistant manager, and when I spoke up about discrimination, I was told to stay in my lane. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Rosa continued. But that day in Savannah, I remembered something my mother told me when I was 12. The truth might not make you popular, but it will make you powerful. She paused, eyes gleaming. Celeste didn't just listen to me, she acted. She didn't make me smaller. She made space for me to rise. The applause that followed was not polite. It was thunderous. As Rosa stepped back, Celeste returned to the microphone. The Dignity First protocol is now live in every one of our branches. But I didn't come here today just to report our progress. I came to challenge you. CEOs, bank managers, regulators, how many of you have protocols that protect revenue, but not respect? Silence again. Tighter this time. Change begins, Celeste said. When silence ends, she tapped the tablet beside her, and the screen behind her changed once more. It now displayed a call to action. DignityFirst.org launching nationwide accountability scorecards. We're releasing our policies, our training curriculum, our feedback data publicly. Not because we're perfect, but because we're trying. And we dare you to try, too. From the wings of the stage, Harold Jennings, now Director of Security, Culture, and Training, smiled as he watched. He had gone from uniformed guard to national trainer, teaching de-escalation strategies rooted in empathy and awareness. And in a quiet side hallway, Maggie Ellison sat on a folding chair next to a young intern running the live stream. She chuckled softly. "Told you she was a thunderstorm in heels," Maggie whispered. The camera zoomed in on Celeste one last time. Her gaze swept the room, not asking for applause, not even asking for agreement. Just accountability. And then she said it. "Dignity is not a donation. It's a debt long overdue." The room erupted again, but Rosa, still backstage, whispered a line to herself that no microphone caught. She paid it, in full. The live stream numbers spiked, and in a town 3 states away, a young woman watched the replay, clutching a business card with Celeste Langston's name on it, her face reflecting not awe, but something braver. Determination. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a gavel or a grand gesture. Sometimes it enters quietly on a breath held too long, on a voice finally heard, on a truth that refuses to be dismissed. And that's what this story gave us. It began with suspicion, with a black woman simply trying to access her own finances. It began with a question that never should have been asked. Can you prove this is yours? It began in a place that claimed to serve everyone equally, yet built its daily practices on 1,000 silent exclusions. And in that moment, beneath the fluorescent lights of a Savannah bank branch, something cracked not in the woman being questioned, but in the illusion that this kind of bias was rare. Celeste Langston didn't raise her voice that day. She didn't need to. Her silence was deliberate, powerful. It forced the world to lean in. What followed was not a social media trend, it was a reckoning. The stillness of her resistance echoed louder than any outburst ever could. And it made space for others to speak. Rosa Delgado stepped forward with a voice that had been silenced too long. Maggie Ellison lifted a phone to live stream what too many had endured without witnesses. Harold Jennings made a choice not to follow orders blindly, but to listen to conscience. And that's what matters here, the choices. This was never just about one racist employee or one mistaken moment. This was about the system that trained him to see threat where there was none. It was about the policies that gave him cover, the silence that protected him, the structure that had normalized the humiliation of people who didn't look right. It was about every nod, every unspoken rule, every unchallenged bias that allowed him to act with confidence. And it was about the people who decided that enough was enough. What Celeste did after that moment matters just as much. She didn't leave. She didn't sue and disappear. She stayed. She used her position not for retribution, but for reform. She understood something profound. Changing the system requires more than pointing out what's broken. It requires rebuilding with intention, integrity, and inclusion. She demanded transparency. She reshaped policy. She gave dignity a framework. And she made sure that the pain she endured would not be endured again by another nameless face. There's a difference between a company saying, "We're sorry," and a company asking, "How can we do better?" Celeste made them ask the second question, and she made sure the answer was public, measurable, and lasting. What Rosa did was just as brave. It takes enormous courage to speak out when you're not in charge, when your job is on the line, when you've been told your role is to obey, not to question. And yet, she did. She looked at injustice and didn't look away. She said something. She did something. She became the very ally so many hope for and so few dare to be. Even Maggie, with her simple act of recording and sharing, reminded us that bearing witness matters. That silence can either be complicity or the moment before a storm. And that storm, in this story, became a movement. This isn't fiction. This is what dignity looks like. It is calm. It is relentless. It is quiet until it cannot afford to be. And when it rises, it changes not just policy but people. Now, Heritage National Bank stands not as a cautionary tale, but as a case study in transformation. The very branch where it began now greets every visitor with a screen showing live customer feedback, with portraits of local entrepreneurs funded by a program born from pain, with stories displayed on the walls not to shame, but to remember, because we cannot fix what we refuse to name. Older Americans know this story, maybe not this exact one, but the rhythm is familiar. Exclusion, humiliation, resistance, and finally dignity reclaimed. We've seen it in lunch counters, in schoolyards, in courtrooms, and now in a bank lobby. The lesson is simple. Systems do not change themselves. People do. And those people, Celeste, Rosa, Harold, Maggie, weren't extraordinary because they had power. They became extraordinary because they used what little they had, and they used it well, with thought, with heart, with an unshakable belief that dignity is not a privilege, it is a birthright. In every generation, someone must stand still so the world can see what's wrong. In every generation, someone must speak so others remember how. Celeste didn't just confront a man. She confronted a system. Rosa didn't just save a customer, she preserved her own integrity. And the ripple effects of those acts reached boardrooms, Capitol Hill, and living rooms across the country. This story reminds us that quiet resistance can be revolutionary, that the calmest voice can carry the deepest truth, that allies are not background characters, they are bridges, and that justice is not complete when an individual is vindicated, but when the system that failed them is rebuilt to prevent the failure again. So, if you're wondering what to take from this story, take this. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be perfect to be brave. And you don't have to wait for permission to do what is right. Because justice, real justice, begins in small acts of courage and ends in systems transformed by those acts. The philosophy remains: dignity is not a donation. It's a debt long overdue. If this story moved you, leave a number 1 in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe to our channel to hear the next true story where quiet courage changes everything.